Jennifer Lawrence, everybody, Seth announced to enthusiastic applause. Thanks for being here tonight. I know you're busy promoting your new film, but I have to say, you look fantastic. Jennifer settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and adjusting her dress. Thanks for having me, Seth. Always a pleasure to be here. Her voice carried its usual warmth, though there was something slightly guarded in her demeanor that keen observers might have noticed. The interview began innocuously enough. Seth launched into questions about her latest project, a drama about corporate whistleblowing that had been generating Oscar buzz. Jennifer responded with her typical blend of self-deprecating humor and genuine enthusiasm for her craft. The audience laughed at her stories about mishaps on set, and everything seemed to be proceeding as scripted. So this film deals with some pretty heavy themes about corporate accountability, Seth said, leaning forward slightly. It's interesting timing, given all the conversations happening in Hollywood right now about transparency and fairness. Jennifer's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Absolutely. I think it's important for artists to tackle subjects that matter, especially when they reflect real issues in our industry. Seth's expression took on what could only be described as a smirk. Speaking of industry issues, I have to ask about something that's been making headlines recently. There's been quite a bit of discussion about your past comments regarding the gender pay gap in Hollywood. Some critics have said that your advocacy on this issue rings hollow given your own substantial earnings. The atmosphere in the studio shifted palpably. Jennifer's smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. I'm sorry. What exactly are you getting at, Seth? Well, Seth continued, his tone becoming more pointed. You've been very vocal about pay inequality, but some people are questioning whether millionaire actresses complaining about their salaries sends the right message to working women who are struggling to make ends meet. Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. I think you're mischaracterizing the issue entirely. The pay gap isn't just about individual earnings. It's about systemic inequality that affects women at every level of the industry. Seth leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the tension he was creating. But don't you think there's something tone-deaf about celebrities worth tens of millions complaining about money while regular people are dealing with real financial hardship? The audience began to murmur, sensing the shift from friendly banter to something more confrontational. Jennifer's jaw tightened, and her media-trained composure began to crack around the edges. Seth, I'm not sure why you're choosing to frame this conversation this way, she said, her voice maintaining its evenness despite the obvious strain. When I speak about pay equality, I'm talking about fighting for fair treatment for all women in this industry, not just myself. Come on, Jennifer, Seth pressed, his tone becoming almost condescending. Let's be honest here. When you write open letters about being paid less than your male co-stars, aren't you really just negotiating in public? It's a pretty savvy PR move, if you ask me. The color rose in Jennifer's cheeks, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair. The audience had grown noticeably quiet, the uncomfortable energy in the room becoming impossible to ignore. I can't believe you're reducing years of advocacy and activism to a PR stunt, Jennifer replied, her voice beginning to rise. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to speak out about these issues? How much backlash women face when they demand equal treatment? Seth shrugged with theatrical nonchalance. I'm just saying, it's easy to be an activist when it benefits your career. The real question is whether you'd still be fighting for other women if it didn't come with magazine covers and speaking fees. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jennifer stared at Seth with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger, her carefully maintained professional facade beginning to crumble completely. Are you seriously suggesting that I've built my advocacy around personal gain? She asked, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. Seth's smile widened, clearly relishing the reaction he had provoked. I'm not suggesting anything, Jennifer. I'm just asking the questions that people are thinking. Isn't it convenient that your most passionate causes also happen to generate the most media attention? The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging worried glances. This was not the light-hearted celebrity interview they had expected. Jennifer's publicist, standing in the wings, looked visibly distressed and began making frantic gestures toward the production team. "You know what, Seth?" Jennifer's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I've sat here for the past 10 minutes listening to you twist my words and question my integrity. And I'm done pretending this is normal interview behavior." She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, her eyes blazing with indignation. "When I was paid significantly less than my male co-stars for the same work, that wasn't a PR opportunity. It was discrimination. When I chose to speak publicly about it, I knew I'd face exactly this kind of dismissive, patronizing response from people like you." Seth's demeanor shifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected such a direct confrontation. "Look, I'm just doing my job here. Asking the tough questions is what journalists do." "Journalists?" Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you think you are? Because last I checked, journalism involves research and facts, not lazy accusations and cheap gotcha. Moments designed to humiliate your guests." The camera operators continued filming, though some crew members looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the interview had taken. The show's producers in the control room were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial. "I think you're being a little dramatic here," Seth replied, his tone becoming more defensive. "I'm simply pointing out the contradictions in celebrity activism. You can't blame people for being skeptical when wealthy entertainers position themselves as champions of the working class." Jennifer stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. "Dramatic? You ambush me on live television with personal attacks disguised as interview questions, and I'm being dramatic?" She began pacing behind her chair, her hands gesturing emphatically. "You want to talk about contradictions, Seth? Let's talk about how you built your career partly on the shoulders of Saturday Night Live, a show that has been criticized for decades for its treatment of women. And now you have the audacity to lecture me about authenticity?" Seth's face flushed red, his composure finally beginning to crack. "That's completely different, and you know it. SNL's issues don't invalidate legitimate questions about your public statements." "Legitimate questions?" Jennifer's voice rose several octaves. "You haven't asked a single legitimate question tonight. You've made accusations, implied I'm dishonest, and suggested my advocacy is nothing more than a career move. That's not journalism. That's character assassination." The audience was now completely silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Some people in the front rows looked genuinely shocked, while others appeared to be enjoying the spectacle. Despite themselves, Seth attempted to regain control of the situation. "I think we should take a step back here. This is clearly getting more heated than either of us intended." "No, Seth," Jennifer interrupted, her voice cutting through his attempt at de-escalation like a sword. "You intended exactly this. You planned this ambush because you thought it would make for good television. Well, congratulations. You got your viral moment." She moved closer to his desk, her presence commanding the entire studio. "But what you didn't count on was someone actually calling you out for your unprofessional behavior. You've made a career out of safe, softball interviews with celebrities who are too polite to push back against your passive-aggressive nonsense." The color drained from Seth's face as he realized the interview had spiraled completely beyond his control. "Jennifer, I think you're misinterpreting—" "I'm misinterpreting nothing," she snapped. "You sat there with that smug expression, questioning my motives and my integrity, thinking you could steamroll me like you probably do with other guests who are too intimidated to fight back." Her voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level that somehow carried more menace than her previous shouting. "But here's what you failed to understand about me, Seth. I didn't fight my way to the top of this industry by backing down from bullies, and I'm certainly not going to start now." Seth's hands visibly trembled as he reached for his coffee mug, a desperate attempt to appear casual that only highlighted his growing panic. "I think you're overreacting to what was meant to be a thought-provoking discussion about—" "Thought-provoking?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You call ambushing your guests with personal attacks thought-provoking? Let me tell you what's actually thought-provoking, Seth. The fact that a man who has built his entire career on the backs of writers, many of whom are women, has the nerve to question my commitment to gender equality." The studio had become a pressure cooker. Audience members were pulling out their phones, some recording despite strict no-phone policies. Security guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene in what was rapidly becoming the most explosive talk show. Moment in recent memory. Seth attempted to salvage the situation with forced laughter. "Come on, Jennifer, let's not make this personal. We're both professionals here." "Professionals?" Jennifer's eyes blazed with fury. "A professional wouldn't have spent the last 15 minutes trying to discredit everything I've worked for. A professional wouldn't have used their platform to spread false narratives about my advocacy work." She stepped even closer to his desk, her presence now completely dominating the space. "You know what really bothers me about people like you, Seth? You sit in positions of power and influence, and instead of using that platform to amplify important conversations, you use it to tear down women who are actually trying to make a difference." Seth's face was now completely flushed, beads of sweat visible on his forehead under the hot studio lights. "I was simply trying to present a balanced perspective on celebrity activism." "Balanced?" Jennifer's voice cracked like a whip. "There was nothing balanced about your line of questioning. You came prepared with talking points designed to make me look hypocritical and self-serving. That's not journalism. That's a hit job." The camera operators continued filming, though the atmosphere in the studio had become so toxic that several crew members looked like they wanted to flee. The show's director was frantically gesturing from the control booth, but the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. "You want to know what's really hypocritical?" Jennifer continued, her voice rising again. "You make millions of dollars sitting behind that desk, making jokes about current events and interviewing celebrities. But somehow I'm the one whose motives need to be questioned." She gestured broadly at the studio around them. "This entire industry, your show, this network, everything, exists because of the same system you're defending. The same system that systematically undervalues women's contributions, while men like you profit from maintaining the status quo." Seth's composure completely cracked. "That's completely unfair, and you know it. I've always been supportive of women's issues on this show." "Supportive?" Jennifer's voice reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. "You think making occasional jokes about the pay gap constitutes support? You think having female guests on your show so you can attack their credibility constitutes feminism?" The audience was now completely captivated by the spectacle, some people standing to get a better view of the confrontation. The energy in the room was electric with tension and anticipation. "Let me tell you something about real support, Seth," Jennifer continued, her voice now carrying the weight of years of frustration. "Real support means listening to women when they speak about their experiences. Real support means using your platform to elevate their voices, not tear them down. For ratings." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering what felt like a knockout punch. "But you chose the opposite path. You chose to perpetuate the same tired narratives that keep women fighting twice as hard for half the recognition." Seth made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "I think we're both getting carried away here. Maybe we should—" "No, Seth," Jennifer cut him off with finality. "We're not both doing anything. You ambushed me, questioned my integrity, and tried to discredit years of advocacy work. This isn't a mutual misunderstanding. This is you showing your true colors." The studio fell into complete silence, except for the low hum of the cameras still rolling. Jennifer stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of her emotions, while Seth sat behind his desk looking smaller than anyone had ever seen him on television. You know what the most pathetic part of all this is? Jennifer's voice was now deadly calm. You probably thought this would make you look tough, like some kind of hard-hitting interviewer willing to ask the difficult questions. She shook her head with disgust. But all you've done is expose yourself as exactly the kind of person who perpetuates the problems I've been fighting against. A man so threatened by women speaking truth to power that he has to resort to character assassination to maintain his relevance. Seth's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. His usual quick wit had completely abandoned him in the face of Jennifer's relentless verbal assault. Jennifer picked up her purse from beside the guest chair, her movements deliberate and controlled. You want to know what real advocacy looks like, Seth? It looks like walking away from platforms that don't deserve your presence. It looks like refusing to participate in systems designed to diminish and discredit you. The audience watched in stunned silence as she slung her bag over her shoulder. Several people had their phones out, capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become one of the most viral talk show moments in television history. I came here tonight to promote a film about corporate accountability and whistleblowing, Jennifer continued, her voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. How fitting that I'm leaving having exposed the toxic culture that exists right here on this set. Seth finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. Jennifer, please, let's not end things this way. We can work this out. She turned to face him one final time, her expression a mixture of pity and contempt. Work what out, exactly? Your complete lack of professionalism? Your obvious disrespect for women? Your willingness to sacrifice basic human decency for a few viral clips? The cameras continued rolling as Jennifer walked toward the edge of the stage. Here's some free advice, Seth. Next time you want to ambush a guest, make sure you're prepared. For someone who won't just sit there and take it. Seth made one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. This is hardly professional behavior from someone who claims to be an advocate for respectful discourse. Jennifer stopped dead in her tracks and slowly turned around, her eyes blazing with renewed fury. Professional behavior? You want to lecture me about professional behavior after what you just put me through? Her voice rose to a level that seemed to vibrate through the entire studio. You spent 20 minutes questioning my integrity, dismissing my advocacy work, and treating me like a fraud, and now you have the audacity to question my professionalism. She marched back toward his desk, her finger pointed directly at him. Let me make something crystal clear to you and everyone watching this train wreck you call a show. Walking away from abuse isn't unprofessional. It's self-respect. Something you clearly know nothing about. The audience began to murmur and shift, some people standing to get a better view of the confrontation. The energy in the room was explosive, with everyone sensing they were witnessing television history. You know what's going to happen now, Seth? Jennifer's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. This footage is going to be everywhere within hours. Every entertainment outlet, every social media platform, every news program is going to dissect exactly what happened here tonight. Seth's face had gone completely pale, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. Jennifer, And when they do, she continued, cutting him off, they're going to see exactly who you really are. Not the affable late-night host with the quick wit and charming smile, but a small, insecure man who gets his kicks from trying to humiliate successful women. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the stunned studio. Good luck explaining this to your bosses, your sponsors, and your viewers. Good luck explaining how you turned what should have been a standard promotional interview into a masterclass in workplace harassment. Jennifer turned and began walking toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor with definitive finality. As she reached the edge of the stage, she called out without turning around, "Oh, and Seth? Next time you want to question someone's authenticity, maybe start by looking in the mirror." With that devastating final blow, Jennifer Lawrence walked off the Late Night with Seth Meyers set, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and uncomfortable silence. Seth sat frozen behind his desk, staring at the spot where she had been standing, the magnitude of his miscalculation written clearly across his stunned expression. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing the awkward aftermath, as crew members scrambled to figure out what to do next. Finally, someone in the control booth called for a commercial break, but the damage was already done. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would be trending across every social media platform, with overwhelming public support rallying behind Jennifer Lawrence and widespread criticism directed at Seth Meyers' unprofessional conduct. The incident would spark industry-wide conversations about respect, professionalism, and the treatment of women in entertainment, ultimately leading to significant changes in how talk show interviews are conducted and monitored. Seth Meyers had gotten his viral moment, but not in the way he had intended.